Well, good morning, LifeGroup leaders. We're back again. In fact, thank you, Richard, for pinch hitting for all of us last week. I guess you were flying solo with I was gone and Brother Tom was gone, so I appreciate you doing that. So your bonus check will be in the mail. Okay. So we're on lesson number 7, which is page 60 in your book. The name of the lesson is Compassionate. Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 38. So today, again, when we get together and do the videos, we trust your good judgment as teachers and leaders, and Richard, Tom, and I like to just share some ideas. So that's kind of the style I want to take today, is just share some of the thoughts I had as I was working on the lesson. And Richard, please feel free to jump in anytime and share the same thing. So with that, let's begin. We always try to talk about application on each of our lessons. How does it apply to our life? The so what? And when I read this, it's like there is no question what the so what is. It's right out there. This is exactly the attitude and character that Jesus wants us to have as Christians. We don't have to guess what it is or try to figure out what the lesson's about. It's like a blinking neon sign telling us here that this is the application he wants. And the first verse that in the book, verse 27 in our lesson, I think is, I had to get past that verse. So let me just read that to us, and then we'll talk about some of the ideas here. It says, "But I say to you who listen, love your enemies, do what is good to those who hate you." That is easy to read, but I'll admit that is hard to do. Love your enemies, and it didn't say enemy, enemies, plural. And love your enemies is what Jesus wants us to do, and it's the challenge there. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's who are my enemies? Do I have enemies? I had to kind of go through that thought process and think, well, I don't know of maybe one or two people that don't like me. Of course, I grew up in Oklahoma, and I think of Will Rogers, who said he never met anybody he didn't like. I can't say that. I met a few people I didn't like, but I'm not Will Rogers. I probably have a few enemies. Then I got to thinking, I probably have more enemies than I even think I do. Some of them, I don't even know their name. I don't even know, never met them. Michelle and I just took a trip this past week. Some of my enemies I met during the construction zone between, the one part of Dallas and the other during rush hour, who wanted that lane that I was in, and I guess didn't pull over. And so it's like some of the enemies I'm challenged to love maybe are very temporary, but I think I have that. So I kind of had to go through a thought process of who are these people that God and Jesus here is instructing us to love. So I put a list, and chime in, Richard, if you think of some. Sometimes it can be even people in my family, that there's cousins and aunts and uncles and others who have disagreements. There's hopefully that's not a long-term enemy, but there's sometimes some pretty spirited discussions that happen in families, and some hurt feelings in people, especially around the holiday period that we just went through. Sometimes it can even be between church members. As crazy as that sounds, there's been real hurt feelings between people over issues that have really divided. I mentioned the construction zone and other drivers on 630 or 430 or I-30 or I-35 or wherever you're driving. We see all over the news now in this very problematic election cycle. Our country's in such a turmoil, and you hear the hate groups is how they're labeled on TV: Antifa, BLM, white supremacy. You hear all these supercharged words that try to pit people against each other and to stir up division. It doesn't take long on Facebook or Twitter to see, and people will post something and somebody objects so strongly they attack the other person, and you see that going on. So have you seen any evidence of that lately, Richard?
A little bit, although I learned to just turn it off,
Yeah.
after a while. But just a couple comments on that first verse. It's when it says love your enemies, I think there's two things that came to my mind on this, is to consider why they are enemies. Is it because of some long holding political disagreement or something that happened in the past? Or are they our enemies or because of our faith? Because we're going to see some people that are going to consider us to be enemies, which gives rise to the second question in that verse. It says love your enemies. And that means, do we have enemies? Do we have people we consider to be enemies? And parallel to that, are we their enemies? Is this kind of like a one-way street here? So that parallel just stuck out to me. And then the rest of the verses there says, these are expressions of love. It's one thing to love somebody, but what does that mean?
Right.
And Jesus in these phrases or in these verses says very specifically, here's some steps that you can take toward them. So
I like how you brought that out. There's some people that may consider me their enemy, but I don't consider them my enemy.
Right.
So it's not always a two-way street. So we need to be aware of that. And when it says love, and like you said, and some of the things they do to hurt or the natural response, I think, is to repay evil with evil, even though it says not to, or to defend ourselves or whatever. To love our enemy, to me, is really, it's all about kind of emotional control. It's not to do the natural, but to do the supernatural, love them who's hurting me or talking bad about me or whatever. So it's really the ability, and I grew up playing baseball, and the baseball coach always tried to tell, what are you going to do if they hit you the ball? There's a runner on first, there's 2 outs, you're the shortstop, they hit a grounder, where's the ball? Well, the play's at second, that's a force at second. So if you already premeditate, how am I going to respond in this situation? I think I have to do that. I'm going to have to do that. To love my enemy, I'm going to have to predetermine not if these things happen, but when I'm assaulted, spoken bad about, cut off on the interstate, that I am not going to return the same type of behavior to them that they did to me. I'm going to choose to love them, but I've got to decide to do that beforehand and not in the moment. So
it's not conditional.
baseball.
It's not if they love us.
Right.
We're supposed to be the initiators and the sustainers of that love.
So Richard kind of touched on it in verses 28 through 35. We can read down through there. I won't, but I know you have as teachers. But we're to love those who hate you, curse you, mistreat you, physically harm you, who steals your clothes, who steals your property. It's like, wow, that all those type of offenses against you. I mean, it talks about if someone hits you on the cheek, to turn the other cheek. We've heard that expression about from that verse, and whether that's physically hitting you or verbally kind of hitting you and attacking your character or whatever, to turn the other cheek. And even to pray for those who mistreat you. And it talks about treat them the way you want to be treated. We know the good old golden rule, do unto others the way you want others to do unto you. And that's very true, regardless of how they've treated you. So that's very important.
One of the things that this is Tuesday when we're doing this taping, but in the email that was sent out this morning, something struck me in that about this lesson. And that is, it's not that we're not supposed to respond or that we're supposed to just be passive, but we are to take an action that is really the opposite of what they might take against us. So it's not a matter of, just turning the other cheek, but offering something else in exchange for it that is very different than the way they treated us.
Right.
Thought that was a good point.
I like that. It would be completely an unexpected response from us. They would probably expect the enemy, the same response they gave to us that we would return. So one of the thoughts I had too, as we kind of at the front part of the lesson here, I used to take, I guess the word pride, for people that I knew that didn't like me, and I would, well, on a continuum, you've got hate on one end of the continuum and love on the other. If I could get somewhere in between at the point of just indifference, I didn't hate them. I wasn't going to be evil to them, but I didn't love them. If I could get to the point of just being kind of where it didn't bother me and I wasn't going to return evil with evil. But that's not what Jesus is saying. He said, don't get to the point of just being indifferent. Go all the way, like you said, with love and good actions, and because this is a response with positive actions. Verse 38 is kind of one of the rewards that's in here. After it talks about don't judge in verse 37, verse 30, give and it will be given to you, a good measure pressed down. We'll talk about that in a minute a little bit more. But where's the reward? Oh, here it is, verse 35. Then your reward will be great and you will be children of the Most High. Mm-hmm. That's a huge reward, that we would be called children of the Most High, and we know that in God the Father. It's like if we do and when we do these things to our enemies, God will reward us for sure. Okay. One of the verses talked about mercy and being merciful in verse 36. Be merciful just as your Father is also merciful. And the two words just as jumped out. The following verse, one of the verses talks about forgiving. Oh, there it is, verse 37. Forgive and you will be forgiven. So the Lord's Prayer came to mind in Matthew. In fact, let me go there real quick. Matthew 6:19 through 13. And it's a little part of the Lord's Prayer, I admit, I did not pick up on for several years until kind of recently. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. I could actually insert the word forgive us our debts just as. So if I'm not willing to forgive my debtors or those who trespass against me in some versions, I'm saying, God, the same type of forgiveness I'm willing to extend is what I want you to extend to me. Right. And I thought, whoa, and that's kind of what I thought of. Forgive and you will be forgiven. So that's basically what the Lord's Prayer said. When Jesus prayed that prayer, I'm to forgive my enemies, and God will forgive me of my transgressions against him. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think, that doesn't say that if we forgive our enemies, they're going to forgive us. And we shouldn't be looking for that, nor should we expect it. But all of these things that Gary's brought up are expressions of this, quality of compassion. And they're pretty specific. Pray, bless, give your coat, all of these things. But the whole theme of compassion is found in a lot of verses really throughout the Bible. I'm not going to go through and explain all of them here, but some that you might look for in addition to what Gary just referred to, certainly in the New Testament are, and I'll just give you some, you can look them up if you'd like, but Matthew 9:36, Colossians 3:12, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, and then in the second chapter of Philippians, verses 1 and 3. All of them speak on some level to the need for us to be compassionate, just as the Lord has been compassionate to us. And when you talk about forgiveness, the reality, the human reaction, the human tendency is to want or to expect forgiveness from others, or expect more forgiveness than others from others. Let me start that again. To expect more forgiveness from others than we are willing to give them. We've got to overcome that tendency. And it is a normal part of living life in the flesh, but the Lord is saying, strive for this. The standard is not perfection, but the expectation is that we continue to try to do that. And really what in these verses Jesus is modeling what we're supposed to do
All right.
for us,
Yes.
and he's pretty specific.
He's a perfect role model.
And let me just mention one other place you may want to look. You can draw some reinforcement to what Jesus is saying in the words of Paul in Titus chapter 3, which that whole chapter speaks to how we're supposed to live in society and respond and engage with society. That's a pretty timely message as we consider what we've been through in the last several days and what might come to pass here in the next few weeks and months and, of course, years, really. But Paul really echoes what Jesus has said. And I think you'll find some good reference and reinforcement there in chapter 3 of Titus.
Yeah, sounds good. One of the verses I thought of is kind of the opposite. What happens if you don't forgive? And we've heard it's Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14 and 15. I'll read it real quick. You've heard the verse about the root of bitterness. Well, this is that verse. Hebrews, what did I say? 12. I'm one page over. Here we go. Verse 15. See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Right. And I think of some people who are very bitter and grudge holders, and for years, and that root of bitterness in them, it says, grows up. It sometimes becomes a sequoia tree. And it has collateral damage. It affects their family, their relationships, because they're not willing to forgive. They hold to those grudges and stuff. So that's kind of the negative reaction to just the opposite of what Jesus is asking people to forgive each other and don't judge, don't hold the grudges there. Verse 38, let's look at that. When I was reading some of the commentary, one gentleman referred to this as being maybe one of the misinterpreted verses in the Bible, and I guess it could be. It talks about, and we've talked about giving mercy. Well, let's just read the verse, then I'll talk about it. It says, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Some people, I think, may think that's giving material things or something, but we're talking about giving mercy, giving forgiveness, giving love, giving them not the benefit of the doubt. Don't judge others. It says, give them your coat and your shirt. So it's really the expressions of love that if we give that, it will be given back from God to us, a good measure. In fact, I think of that, whether it's a flour sifter or a coffee grinder, you can kind of pour it in, but if you really push it down and pack it, you can get a lot more in the measuring cup there. And it's like, that's the visual expression here. You'll get more, and it'll be overflowing and poured in our laps. So we'll get all of that in return from God as we will get mercy, forgiveness, love, not judgment. And so that's what I think he's referring to there. So then it kind of brings me to that question. It's like, is it really possible for me as a human to love my enemies? I mean, it's easy to read. It's hard to do. But is it possible? Is it really an obtainable goal? And I was talking to Richard here before we began, and I had to admit that my answer is actually no. It's not possible for me, in and of myself, to love my enemies. The only way that I can accomplish that is by having God's love flow through me to them. In fact, I think it was one of our devotionals on Tuesday or yesterday, I can't remember, if you get the little email with the devotion that talks about the only way I can really love my enemy is for me to have experienced that love from God, where I was his enemy, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So he loved me when I was acting as his enemy. So if he can do that for me, I can do that for others. So the answer then becomes, yes, I can do that, but only with God's help. What are your thoughts on any of that?
No, I think that's exactly right. And, we have several examples in the Bible as well. We have the teachings of Jesus, but, he was perfect and without sin, though. But if you think about his words on the cross, where he asked for forgiveness for the people who were crucifying him, Stephen echoed that as well as he was being stoned to death. His words were, have mercy upon them, be compassionate towards them, Father. And of course, that was quite a scene, compelling as though it is. But we know that standing there watching all of that was the Apostle Paul, before he was called, or before he was an apostle. He was watching that and watching that reaction, and it had a profound impact on him. Mm-hmm. And why is this guy that my comrades are killing and stoning? Listen to what he's saying. He's not reacting like he's supposed to. And so he was responding with compassion towards them, because he was looking for, and I'm not a singer or anywhere near it, but the words of a song came to mind that says something like, I hope I've got this right, he looked beyond my fault and saw my need. And I think as we consider people that are attacking us, our enemies, and what's going on in the world, we have to remember that a lot of people that wish us well or do us harm or are doing things that we don't understand, we've got to understand that we were once there, and we were of the world. We hadn't been transformed by the renewing of the spirits yet. And these people are every bit as spiritually blind as a blind person is physically. And so we have to reflect what the Lord would have us to do, so that they can see that in us, and then through the working of the Holy Spirit, that they might be drawn to salvation. Stephen will never know the impact, or didn't know this side of heaven, what impact his response and his compassionate response to his enemies was having on Paul. And of course, it was all being orchestrated by God, of course. But we have to keep in mind that how we respond to certain situations and challenges and our enemies or what have you, they're watching. There's lots of people watching. And the question is, what are we witnessing as they watch us? So,
good point. In fact, when you said that about Paul, I of course thought of a very hopefully familiar passage, and maybe even have the plaque on your wall at home. 1 Corinthians 13, the love is section, and I'll just read it real quick. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. So there's kind of that whole response. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And then the next three words I think are real powerful. If an enemy, someone, again, it might be a person at the grocery store, some people don't maybe not even know, a family member, whoever the enemy in that situation is, if we respond the way God and Jesus is asking us to, there's no way the person can overcome love. It says love never fails.
never fails, yeah.
Love never fails. They have no, the enemy, our enemy, who maybe is speaking bad, or they have no defense against love. Mm-mm. And at the end, and of these things remain faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Yeah. So it's like, I'm reminded of a fairly recent misunderstanding with a family member who it escalated, and I didn't even know, couldn't even fully understand what was happening, but it appeared there were some hurt feelings or something, and there's a period of, kind of coldness, whatever, and I could tell it's not just going to go away. In fact, it was starting to fester, so to speak, and become bigger, and I called the person, and they wouldn't return my call. Finally, they did after a text or two, and I said, man, I love you. You're part of my family. I don't know what I did or what I said exactly that hurt your feelings, but whatever, I'm sorry, and I need your forgiveness. And if you would share with me a little bit about what I did so I can actually apologize specifically and ask specifically. And what happened that, and I'm not even good at this, but it worked in the sense that approaching them in love, the defenses dropped, the person opened up, shared with me things that I would have never known, of how they were viewing things and perceiving things. Then I understood and could apologize specifically and then clarify some of the misunderstandings, not getting defensive, but we ended up restoring that relationship and getting beyond that. I don't think that would have ever happened if I hadn't, and I'm not even saying that I completely agree with what they did or what, but it doesn't matter. To restore the relationship, I had to lead with love. And guess what? It didn't fail.
Yeah.
It worked. Yeah. So Richard brought up a couple of examples. Obviously, Jesus was a perfect role model on the cross when he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Paul, in that writing, I mean, he was persecuted and run out of town and on and on and on. He still loved people. I thought of the Old Testament example of Joseph when his brothers came back and they were his enemies. They hated their brother so bad they sold him into slavery, and little did they know he was alive in a powerful position, and he forgave them in that verse in Genesis, where he said to them, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. He could have had them all beheaded, and he didn't. He chose to forgive them and love them, and that turned that whole situation around, and he got to see his family again and his dad. So that's a good example, too, that it is possible to do what Jesus said and love others with his help and a clear understanding of who we are with Christ, and then how his love can flow through us. So I kind of wrote out, not a whole prayer, but a little bit of one that we could kind of use as kind of my outline of a prayer I need to pray every day about, dear Lord, help me see other people as you see them, not their skin color, not their political affiliation, not the social status. I don't want to see others, whether they agree with me or even they have violent disagreements on things. I need to see that person as Jesus sees them, as a person worthy of my love and his love. What comments do you have?
Yeah, I just, the only thing I would say to that is, our salvation is an ultimate expression of God's compassion towards us and his grace and his mercy. And if he extended that towards us and he forgives us of our sins and our transgressions, then we need to model that just like Stephen modeled the words and the attitude of Christ as he was stoned to death. And we're talking about being stoned, not just being insulted, that we need to extend that grace and mercy and forgive people in an expression of compassion. I've heard it said, and I guess it's true, that we're never more like Christ than when we forgive.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. It is, and it's also an expression of love. Mm-hmm. And it just, sometimes it's hard to forgive people. But you know what? It tends, for anger that people hold on to, tends to do more damage to the person that hangs on to it than the one that we're angry at or we don't want to forgive. Yeah. So it's not only freeing for the relationship and for them, but it's also freeing for ourselves. It's also being obedient to the call of Christ as he's expressed in these verses.
Yeah. So I thought when you said that, I think it was last September, October, when that police officer in Dallas shot that guy because she came into his apartment thinking, and then we saw the trial on TV where his brother forgave her. Wow. That was moving when he hugged her, and it's like, how could he do that? But that's God's love flowing through him to her. Well, that's all I have. Hopefully that's some thoughts that you can use to take several different directions for your class notes. And Anything else to wrap up, Richard, you want to say?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, you guys have a good week. Thanks very much.